the action didn't stop then. The reason I had this webinar was to forewarn my fellow Americans of dire events that I was expecting to happen today. And they have happened. They have happened domestically, and they have happened internationally. So first, I would like to turn to my co-host Peter Basulka for the financial report. I'll just open up the conversation on the topic of First Republic Bank crashing this morning. As Peter said last week, things look really bad for the future of cash. And apparently there is a big plan afoot, and it's pretty open, that the U.S. government wants banks to crash so that they can amalgamate them and appropriate them and steal all the money, so that they pull all of the cash out of society and make us dependent on digital currency. So with that introduction, I'll turn it over to Peter and just say, hang on there, because last night was Walpurgisnacht, which is a pagan, unholy day on which the Illuminati always plan very, very bad things. And just as I predicted, they have happened, and I will give you a report on the current situation in Ukraine a little bit later. So, Peter, welcome to the program. Thank you for being there. And
thank you, Robert.
So what do you think of the crash of Republic Bank today?
Well, I think it was the way that it's shaping up is this banking crisis seems to be a controlled demolition, destruction of savings banks, and right before there's this term that's being used. They're falling into receivership. So basically, they fall into the receivership of the federal government. The FDIC takes over, and the federal government brokers the assets of the bank to a larger bank. So over the weekend, First Republic Group basically went insolvent, and the federal government took over the bank and brokered a deal for Chase. JP Morgan Chase took over. So now First Republic is now Chase Bank. And yes, we saw this during the financial crisis of 2008, 2009. Approximately, I think, 1,200 small regional banks were consolidated into 4 giant banks, Bank of America being one of them, and JP Morgan Chase being another. And so the bankers do this every 10 to 15 years to eliminate their competition and buy up cheap assets.
Right.
It's odd how they're doing it, because they're using people like me, independent financial advisors, to advise their clients simply do the best thing for our clients. So we haven't seen short-term treasury rates like what we have today in quite some time. So we could buy a 3-month or a 6-month US T-bill and make 2.5% every 6 months. So that's 5% a year. And the T-bill, the US Treasury bill, is the safest investment probably in the world, backed up by the US military. So what's happening is you have Wall Street people like myself just advising their clients and saying, listen, why do you have money in a bank that is not paying you any interest or barely any interest when you could go into U.S. Treasury market and buy these T-bills, and you could sell them, they're liquid. You could sell them in a day to cash, and they slowly increase in value every week as they get closer to par value, which is 1,000. You have to buy 10 at a time. So par value is 1,000. So the U.S. government's going to give you $1,000 for 10 of them every 3 to 6 months, depending on what you buy. And you could sell them. There's no penalties. They're completely liquid. So I have people sending me money left and right to buy these things. I mean, it's like a gold rush right now because
Are you
people
saying
have
that you
been
have to buy
penalized for being
$1,000
conservative.
worth? Are you saying that you have to buy $1,000 worth or $10,000 worth to get the bug?
$1,000. They're
A
about
thousand.
1,000. So yeah, so you buy them at like nine, 997 or something like that. 97, 970, and then they mature at 1,000.
In 3 months?
But it's yes, either you could do 3 or 6 months. So, so it all works out to be about 5% per annum, right? So if you buy them at 3 months, you have to keep on turning the money over 4 times to receive the 5%. If you buy in 6 months, you have to turn the money over just twice to get the 5%. But this is like a gold rush right now because people that are conservative people that don't like to take risks, they just like to save their money. They've been penalized for keeping their money in the bank since 2008, 2009. They've almost received 0% interest. So now this deal comes out, this offering, which the U.S. T-bill is safer than a bank because your banks leverage themselves and they only have about 10% or sometimes even less of the assets inside the bank because when you give a bank $1, they lend out 90 cents of it. So their assets fall or get depleted, they become technically insolvent by the banking rules, and they have to be taken over, or the FDIC takes over. Now, people think, people say to me all the time, "Oh, but my money's safe because it's protected by the FDIC." Well, I mean, what is the FDIC? Basically, the FDIC is a slush fund that the federal government has to buy up these defaulted banks. But I was reading research this week that suggested by the time that this financial crisis is over with the banking system, that 50% of depository banks will be gone. And so what people need to understand is that this slush fund, last I heard it had about $600 billion in it, which sounds like a lot of money, but it's not going to support, it's going to have to keep on getting funded by the federal government. And you know how the federal government works. I mean, they're arguing over the debt ceiling right now. They're slowly cutting back programs until this political ploy with the debt ceiling not being raised is over. So if the FDIC gets jammed up with funds from the federal government, and a lot of these banks start to go at the same time, it might be the FDIC might not have enough fingers to put in the dam.
Yeah.
And
well, it looks to me,
hey, why would you get in a?
It looks to me like it's another big money laundering operation and bilking investors, because I heard that First Republic got a $30 billion infusion a couple of months ago because they were on shaky ground then, and now it's crashed completely. And the FDIC, Biden announced that the FDIC is going to guarantee the small depositors up to $250,000 in their deposits, but they're not going to repay any of the investors. So as I see it, it's a big scam to get investors to invest in these banks. Then the bankers themselves, spread out the money, invest in failed projects, mortgages that are not being paid. And this is another big question. So now in comes JP Morgan, and they get all of this stuff for free because there's no liability for them. They're not having to put any money in to acquire First Republic Bank. And then there was the SVB Bank, which we covered a couple of months ago. I think it's 6 weeks or so ago. SVB Bank crashed. But before it crashed, 3 government officials who were monitoring or handling the money laundering operation from the cartels, the drug cartels in Mexico, were funneling their money into SVB Bank. SVB was sending it to the Bank of Boston. And this New Hampshire businessman has been exposing that. In the meantime, before the SVB bank went down, they withdrew $954 million out of the SVB, and Israel withdrew another $1 billion from SVB and ran away with the cash, and the bank crashed. And so the U.S. government is appropriating these banks and not paying the liabilities. But again, I think you and I see that this is a plot against the American people to just rake all of the cash out of society. And that's the problem with a central bank. And this is what Andrew Jackson was always talking about all the way back then. When Andrew Jackson died, they asked him what we thought was his greatest victory, and he said, "I beat the central bank." And the problem is that central banks come into a community, acquire a bank, and all the cash that's in that bank that usually circulates through the community to build it up, where the homeowner hires the plumber has his expenses, he pays for his materials, the repairman circulates the money within the town, and it starts building within the town. The central banks come in, and every week they siphon away the cash and get more and more people into a credit hole. So back to you, Peter.
Sure. I just want to say that I don't think JP Morgan got the assets for free, but they certainly got I'm sure they got a very good deal on the assets, maybe 10 cents on the dollar type of thing. And I'm sure they just had to pledge the money. They didn't actually have to write a check for it. It's funny. I have political cartoons of Andrew Jackson in the book, and it just dawned on me that you kind of look like Andrew Jackson.
Oh, it depends on my mood, yes. At other times I look like George Washington, and other times I look like a tall white alien. It's I have that shape-shifting ability. Go on.
But the other part of this is we might be seeing the move, this banking financial crisis might be the move to move people away from walking into banks to deposit money. We might be seeing the end of depository banking if they switch out this banking system for digital currency. So you won't need brick and mortar banks anymore if they move to digital. And this could be part of it.
I'm sure it is.
If they go
anything
to
else
war,
to report from Florida?
If I was going to say,
I'm sorry.
Alan, would you turn off your camera? I'll call you in when we're ready. Please mute your mic and turn off the camera.
Okay. Well, I would like to say to the listeners, if anybody's interested in buying U.S. Treasury bonds, to give me a call. I can help them facilitate the transaction, and I trade bonds. It's part of what I do for a living. Some weird stuff. I've been watching the weather. Jen and I were out on the boat this past Thursday, and I pointed out to her all the weather modification programs that were going on, the chemtrails going left and right. Mm-hmm. And I said, I'll bet you my last dollar we're going to see hostile weather this week. And then it was either yesterday or the day before, Palm Beach was hit by an class F3 tornado. Blowing the roof, buildings, capsizing boats.
There's a very interesting thing that's going on. I just got a report that someone dug up a video on chemtrails that was presented to the United Nations. The United Nations had a meeting in 2006, and let me see if I can crank that up. It might be worth hearing. It's on Freedom's Phoenix, which is a very interesting newspaper that. Okay, I have it here. All I have to do is set up the screen share. Let's listen to what they were talking about at the United Nations in 2006 in regard to chemtrails, weather modification. We'll give that a few minutes, and then we'll come back to talk about the terrible things that just has happened overnight in Ukraine. Here we go.
I'm Richard Jordan, chairman of the conference. I'm going to just introduce Khalid Dawood, who will introduce the speakers. So Khalid, thank you very much for moderating this session, and I turn it over to you, and I will return in about 3 minutes.
So our next speaker is Dr. Rosalind Peterson. She's the California president and co-founder of the Agriculture Defense Coalition, formed in 2006 to protect agricultural crop production from uncontrolled experimental weather modification programs. A very interesting topic, you know, for a non-specialized person like myself. But also very interesting in her CV that we have with you is also her extensive efforts to protect drinking water supplies from toxic chemical contamination in Martinez, California. That's a very interesting topic, of course, and I was actually wondering myself whether you can tackle whether the same experiments that you're holding in California could be extended to other world countries, particularly poor and developed countries like where we come from. Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Chairman. It is a pleasure to be here to speak with all of you today. One of the things that I would like to say is that we are in a global drumbeat right at the moment, talking about climate change and global warming. One of the things that is affected by climate change is agriculture. But some of what we are seeing is man-made, but man-made in a different way than you may guess. Weather modification programs, experimental ones done by private companies, done by the United States government, done by states across the United States are underway. There's more than 50 of them in operation across the United States. All of these impact agriculture because they change the microclimates needed for agriculture to survive. None of these programs that I know of today, and this is all public record, are available at any time with oversight, agricultural oversight or public oversight. These programs impact agriculture, and there are programs around the world. International corporations are modifying our weather all the time, and they're modifying it in ways that cover thousands and thousands of square miles. Most of it is chemically altered. So what happens is that we are putting chemicals, ground-based chemicals that are shot into the air, or chemicals coming from airplanes that change and modify our weather. So one of the things that I'm concerned about and that we need to address in the future is how these programs are impacting microclimates needed for our crops to survive and needed for pollination. If we change the growing season, the pollinators may not survive, and also our crops, our flowers, and our tree crops may not get the pollination needed. So one of my areas is looking at this situation to see if we can begin to put under control experimental and other types of weather modification programs. The other issue is that a lot of times we're talking about mitigation for climate change. It's rather an undefined term at this period of time. And so what happens is that many times we're talking about artificially putting chemicals like sulfur or particulates into the atmosphere in what they call geoengineering schemes to reduce and help the planet, supposedly, but help the planet to not go through such a tremendous global climate change and to mitigate global warming. However, the incidence of putting chemicals into our atmosphere is going to change and impact agricultural crop production. And if you take and you put up into our skies chemicals to reduce the amount of sunlight reaching the earth, you are going to begin to reduce crop production. Studies at the University of Illinois on corn crop production show reductions. Without the process of photosynthesis, whereby plants from direct sunlight gain the energy to grow, to produce crops, we are going to find ourselves, if we mitigate in that direction, impacting the crop production not only here in the United States, but worldwide. One of the things that is impacting crop production right now in the United States and reducing photosynthesis and also impacting the ability of solar power panels to generate the type of power that they should is persistent jet contrails. NASA talks about persistent jet contrails as exacerbating global warming because they trap warmth in the atmosphere when they produce cirrus and man-made clouds. NASA also talks about that these aircraft leaving persistent contrails are changing our climate. And when they change our climate to the degree that one jet can leave a persistent jet contrail, which will spread across our skies, from what this picture up here on my left on the screen looks like, which is a trail left by a jet, that trail can expand to 4,000 kilometers and last for 20 hours. This was unheard of in the early 60s and the 70s, and it wasn't until the late 1980s that there was a change and we started to have persistent jet contrails that persist. NASA studies show that part of our global warming problem could be attributed to these types of contrails and the jets that leave them. So one of the issues as we go through is, how do you like your skies, natural or man-made? And right now we are making man-made clouds, and this is trapping warmth in our atmosphere. The climate change that is produced by these jets, not all jets, mostly some non-commercial, but what happens to our skies is that we start to see the changes. The man-made clouds do trap the warmth, and they increase the humidity. This allows for pests to proliferate, diseases, molds, mildews, funguses, and viruses. This is a man-made cloud, ladies and gentlemen, and these pictures I took myself over Northern California, and this is a burst. This is where a jet left a huge plume, and then this turned in at the end of it to a burst. And this is not normal, never seen before in our county historically, and I was born and raised there. This is another picture showing the jet trail just before the burst. This is our skies, and I want you to know that what you're seeing now, a lot of times many scientists know, especially at NASA and in other areas, that the skies that we're seeing are not normal cloud formations. These are man-made. And what happens as we reduce the amount of sunlight in a form of global dimming, we reduce the solar power with these type of clouds, and we reduce photosynthesis, which is going to impact agriculture. The pictures look odd. The formations don't look like normal clouds that people have seen before historically. This is another type of man-made cloud, and what we have done and what you're seeing here is we have the photographs from the times that the jet leaves the first trail as a thin, spindly trail to where they form into these different types of cloud formations. All of you can start looking up and seeing this. What happens is that there are experiments, and there's a color, you can see some color in this photograph. And part of what we're doing also is we're sending up canisters. The United States government, NASA, the U.S. Air Force, is sending up canisters into the atmosphere filled with chemicals to modify and experiment with our ionosphere. And when we modify and experiment with our ionosphere up here, we create experiments which they can see through these persistent jet contrails as they stay in the sky for long periods of time, and they can watch the experiments. The type of chemicals they are using are aluminum, barium, strontium, and these canisters are sent up on rockets, and what they do is they superheat the canisters to create experiments in our atmosphere. The experiments can give you colorful auroras, which they talk about as being wonderful. Many times people think that the auroras in Alaska and the ones we see are normal, but there's beginning to be more and more seen across the United States and elsewhere where aluminum, trimethyl aluminum experiments to make clouds are beginning to impact us. The reason I am concerned for agriculture is that none of these experiments have any public oversight nor agricultural oversight. Our drinking water is impacted because the chemicals are now beginning to show up in our drinking water. In California, the State Department of Health drinking water tests were examined between 1970 and this year, and we found unusual spiking in barium, aluminum, strontium, magnesium, calcium, manganese, and all of these spiked at the same time in various drinking water supplies across the state of California and also in Arizona. So what's happening with these atmospheric tests is that aluminum, as one example, gets into, with increased pollution and acid rain, gets into the root systems of our crop trees and our trees, and it looks like the trees are dying of drought, but they're not. What happens is that the root systems can no longer absorb the water and the nutrients needed to survive. Many of our forests in California and other areas are dying. The oak trees, redwood trees, Douglas fir, across the United States in many areas. We believe that these trees are impacted because they cannot absorb enough water because aluminum is going into their root systems.
Robert, the sound went bad on this video.
Okay. Thanks. Sometimes there's a degradation in the sound as we share screen, but I think we've let that play enough to get the message. But this lady, now this is 2006, and this lady's pointing out chemtrails without really knowing the real nature of chemtrails that were already being used at that time. We are still under a huge propaganda mind control operation regarding quote unquote global warming. There's no global warming. What people are saying, the seas are rising because of the melting of the ice caps. A friend of mine, very intelligent man, very well educated, pointed out to me, he said, Robert, they're full of baloney. That's not the word he used, but since families are listening to this program, they're full of malarkey. He says, what's happening? They claim that the ocean is rising, but it's not rising. What is happening is erosion. The sea comes in, the tide comes in, the waves break on the shore, it tears up the sand and tears up the soil, and it carries it away. And that is called erosion. It's not the rising sea levels. Secondly, this myth about carbon dioxide being a threat to the planet is a total sham. Do you know how much carbon dioxide there is in the atmosphere, Peter? I'll just ask you the question. And I'd like to bring Alan in. Alan, you can turn on your mic and come into the conversation. Do either of you know what percentage of carbon dioxide there is actually in the atmosphere? Just take a guess.
Off the top of my head, no, but I think that mankind is a hair on a camel's back.
Right.
As far as
this question was asked of me, and I had my answer, and
I'd say it would be somewhere between 10 to 15%.
Wrong. You, Peter, guess?
Well, from the tone of Robert's voice, I'm going to go lower and say 3%.
Wrong. The actual carbon dioxide content of the atmosphere is 416 parts per million, which is 0.000416 of a percent. That's how big the lie is. I was along with Alan when my friend, the other Alan, asked me the question. Guess. I said, what, 16%? And he said the same thing to me. Wrong. He said, look it up. And I did. It's with 3 zeros and 416, 416 parts per million. So that is one of the biggest lies that anyone is pawning. And so many people are buying. Carbon dioxide is good. the Carboniferous era, you know, so 300 million years ago, marked the greatest burgeoning of life on Earth, both plants and animal. In 2001 to 2005, Al Gore was going around, you know, barking at everybody about how the carbon dioxide was causing global warming and how the polar bears were dying. And NASA started to tag polar bears and took account of the polar bear population. And they found at that time there were 15,000 polar bears. They've kept tracking them over the years. And as I recall now, about 2 or 3 years ago, they came up with the current count, 40,000 polar bears now. Why? Because even polar bears like warm weather, if it's true that the Earth is warming. So that's one of the worst mind control operations that the world has suffered. Look at those crazy people in Europe, totally mind bent, crazy gluing their faces and their butts to famous paintings, stopping traffic, claiming that they're dying, Greta Thunberg being the most hysterical of all of them. But they have just mind control the whole population. And this is part of this global mind control operation that's twisting everything, destroying our culture, destroying national identity, national values, and personal identity. And so I really believe that this is part and parcel of an alien influence on our world that is trying to communize the world and destroy national borders while at the same time they're putting the global population on reservations. So, Alan, do you want to chime in, or do you want to wait till 11 o'clock when we talk about UFOs?
I think he fell off.
No, he's there.
I'm here.
He's just.
Oh, is it that the Florida one?
No,
he's not Florida.
Colorado.
First last. That's his handle on Skype.
Oh.
First and last. Okay.
There was
Alan,
there was a couple of things that I wanted to chime in on.
Yeah.
As far as the finances are concerned, everybody pretty well knows that the Bush family financed the Germans during the World War II. Well, how would that actually come about? Well, it would come about the same way that Iraq and everybody got new weapons to play with, because they didn't have enough weapons over there in order to sit there and join us in war. So what we had to do is take billions of dollars worth of weapons over to Iraq, Iran, Afghanistan, drop them there so they had something to fight with. After all, it's not very good if you're having a war and nobody can play.
Well, I guess they wanted bigger weapons than swords.
Yeah, exactly. But here's the key here. When these banks are folding, a lot of times they're out of town anyway. They're not from your area. They're from another country. Example, BP Oil. That's not even an oil company. It's just simply a bank. And they're out of England. So if we went to war with England, what would happen financially? And what would happen to the banks that are representing them here? It's an interesting problem in order to deal with at a time of war. That's how the Bush administration was able to submarine all this money into the German war effort.
Well, the thing is that our enemy in the earlier half of the 20th century, the real enemy of the United States has always been England. England has never given up the desire to get the colonies back. And England fomented the Civil War. And what people don't know, after World War II, we were in World War I, everybody thought we were really tight with the English and buddies and they're our friends. But the fact is that most of America's war plans between the two wars, between World War I and World War II, was to defend ourselves against England in a war with England. That's why the naval buildup was so important in the 1920s and 30s, and they had all of those meetings and agreements on limiting the size of navies. And it was primarily because the United States had concerns that the British Navy, the Royal Navy, would be loosed against us. But by building up Germany and building up Hitler's war machine, pre-planning it. This is what they do all the time. Look at what they did with Ukraine. They overstocked Ukraine with weaponry so they could take on Russia in a hopeless war, which is what I want to turn my attention to right now. We have enough minutes here for me to read you a terrible, terrible report. As I told you, I felt that something was happening. The Illuminati always plan a mass murder and human sacrifices on certain days of the year. And April 30th is one of theirs. It's you might consider it Hell Night in Europe and Hell Night in Germany. So I was conducting this webinar to alert people here and around the world that we have to be careful right now in these days, April 30th, May 1st, May 2nd, because this is when they unleash their attacks, and they are international in scope and they are national in scope. And so they will plan terrible crimes, crime waves, as well as exacerbate situations. Instead of working for peace, they will inflame wars. So just as I predicted, I ended the webinar last night. I stayed up, and all of a sudden I got this report, care of Hal Turner, who keeps his finger on the pulse. And it says Russia retaliates for attack on Sevastopol, massive Russian attacks. Russia has launched at least 10 Tu-95 bombers into Ukraine, and those aircraft are launching a large number of cruise missiles against Ukrainian targets. Above, this picture is shown of totally scorched earth, you might say, in Ukraine. Above, a massive explosion in Pavlograd, a Ukrainian-occupied portion of the Donetsk Oblast. It seems a Ukrainian missile storage depot was hit. Initial reports say Russian missiles struck a rail yard and a Ukrainian arms depot on the outskirts of the city. Multiple missiles inside the depot then launched catastrophically and unguided into the night sky. Update, 8:42 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. That was yesterday. Tu-95M strategic bombers went airborne from Olenia Air Base in northwestern Russia and flew into Ukraine to attack. Now confirming Tu-95Ms are now airborne from several other air bases across western Russia. Additional strikes are imminent. 7 minutes later, update, 8:50 p.m. Sources inside the Ukraine army say the attack resulted in 2 entire Ukrainian army divisions lost. In addition, source now confirms 16 S-300 missile defense launcher systems and all their missiles refilled canisters were destroyed. 6 minutes later, update, 8:56 p.m. 100 Shahed drones now reportedly airborne heading into Ukraine. Flash, U.S. Boeing P-8 Poseidon has entered Ukrainian airspace while the Russian attacks are taking place. Update, 9:05 p.m. Eastern. Confirmation received that a total of 27 Russian Tu-95M strategic bombers are in the air carrying a minimum of 130 to a maximum of 200 cruise missiles and are being used in tonight's attack. Confirmation also received that the number of Geran-2 UAVs, unmanned aerial vehicles, flying over Ukraine now exceeds 50. Confirmation that multiple Russian submarines in the Black Sea carrying additional missiles are off the coast of Ukraine but have not yet fired. Shahed 136 drones are currently flying toward Mykolaiv and Kherson. More, 4 missile carriers that can hold up to 24 caliber missiles each have been deployed to the Black Sea in the last few hours. Update, 9:13 p.m. Eastern. 3 Tu-160 bombers have now also taken off from Russia, heading toward Ukraine. The P-8A Poseidon of the U.S. Navy has completed its mission and is now back safely in Moldova airspace. Of note, during the chaos of the ongoing attacks in Kiev, the commander of a territorial defense unit of the Ukraine, Major General Olenik Vladimir, was eliminated. He was shot near his house. Update, 9:17 p.m. Eastern. Russian bombers over the Caspian Sea have fired missiles, impacts inside Ukraine within 30 minutes. Covert intel source inside Ukrainian army now confirms Russian bombers destroyed 26 S-300 air defense complexes tonight. Ukraine now has no more air defenses. Tonight's attacks by Russia have the most Tu-95 bombers in the air since the fall of the Soviet Union. Very large Russian attack. Update 9:21 p.m. Eastern. Reports now of missile launches from Russian ships in the Black Sea as well. Additional launch commands are still being put out over the Russian strategic net. Bulletin. A large number of U.S. fighter jets are taking off from Incirlik Air Base inside Turkey. Video of 2 on full afterburners. Not known where they are going. Update 9:33 p.m. Eastern. Air raid warning sirens are now sounding in the red areas of the map of Ukraine, and the red areas in this map show everything from eastern Ukraine of Donetsk and Kharkiv and Sumy all the way to Zhytomyr and Odessa. Western Ukraine is in the black, in the dark. Of note, 2 U.S. intelligence planes have taken off from NATO bases in Germany. Also of note, NATO AWACS taking off from Poland. Double note, air refueling tankers taking off from Ramstein Air Force Base in Germany. Update, 9:38 p.m. New missiles are being fired from the Caspian Sea. New air raid alert sounding in Lviv, western Ukraine near the Polish border. 9:44 Eastern. Per Ukrainian officials, missiles were detected in the airspace of Ukraine. They are urging everyone to get to shelter. Flash. Russia is now aggressively jamming over the horizon radar throughout all of Europe. Also, launch commands are still being put out over the Russian strategic net. Update 9:47 p.m. Eastern. Russian cruise missiles are on the way to central Ukraine. Kiev is very likely to be targeted within the next 15 to 20 minutes. Kiev Regional Military Administration, quote, residents of Kiev region, there is a threat of missile attack, unquote. Update 9:55 p.m. Eastern. Missile launches reported from the Sea of Azov. First explosion of the night in Dnipro. More. Additional missile launches reported from ships and aircraft over the Sea of Azov and the Black Sea heading northwest. Update 9:59 p.m. Eastern. Explosions in Kiev. Cruise missile detected over Kharkiv. More explosions heard in Dnipro. Explosions heard in the suburbs of Kiev. Explosions reported in the Dnipropetrovsk Oblast. Oblast is their word for county or state. Update 10:52 p.m. Eastern. Jets which took off from Incirlik in Turkey were not U.S. They were U.K. heading to Syria. 11:02 p.m. Eastern. Attacks appear to be over. Live updates terminated. So that is the situation in Ukraine, and I'm sure that no one has heard a word about it in the mass media. And thanks to Hal Turner and Hal Turner Radio for that report. Back to you guys. Oh, let me see. Oh, yes, we have 10 minutes. Anyone care to comment? Well,
did I hear you say that Ukraine's air defenses have been obliterated?
Obliterated, yes. They have no early warning, and they have, to my knowledge, they have very few airplanes. They have no more missiles. The S-300 missile batteries have been wiped out. So this is the reality. And you know what Joe Biden was doing last night while all of this was going on? He was hosting the White House press reporters dinner, the press corps dinner, sitting there, ha-haing, laughing, getting jokes made about him, and not a word to the American people on how dire the situation has become in Ukraine. Alan, do you have something to pitch in?
Yeah, I was just realizing, what strategic value could it possibly have if the UK is losing this so badly as apparently they are? Why are they continuing to say in American TV and everything else that they're doing just fine, and we sent a couple of things over there and a glass of milk for them? And meanwhile, obviously, they're not doing well at all. The question is, what is the strategic value of that?
It's not a strategic value, it's an economic value. It's the same thing that you pointed out about George Bush building up Hitler's war machine. War makes profits for the military-industrial complexes in all countries. And that is what is happening here. They are running money laundering, bribery, graft, all kinds of operations. There's been over $150 billion just from the United States alone has been funneled to Ukraine. And half of that is in armaments. So half of the money that is ostensibly given to Ukraine to defend itself is actually buybacks for American weaponry. And the problem is they bought so many weapon systems and exhausted them that they have defanged the U.S. military. If we were to go to war tonight with China, we don't have enough ammunition to win such a war without the use of nuclear weapons.
Hey, either that or you have to call the GDs in Chicago. They'll take care of it.
Who are the GDs?
Gangster disciples.
Oh yeah.
We got plenty of armies in America that have their own tune they like to follow. I don't think they're going to be able to follow that on Russian or Chinese control. So I think they've got a lot of work in order to try to get in here.
Well, that's true. That's why the Second Amendment is so important. The Japanese knew that. The moment that they had attacked Pearl Harbor, Admiral Yamamoto, who had organized the attack, said, "I'm afraid we have only awakened a sleeping tiger." And what he was referring to was the fact that he had studied in the United States. He had gone to university here in the United States and before the war, and he knew that Americans are armed and that no Japanese army would ever be able to invade the United States mainland and overwhelm the American people because of arms. But the other part of this agenda to destroy the United States from within is this onslaught on the Second Amendment. Every time that there's a shooting of some sort here or there or everywhere at times, it seems, they start attacking the Second Amendment instead of attacking the real problem, which is mental illness, emotional disturbances, drugs, medication that makes people either suicidal or homicidal, and they always attack the gun. And that's my saying is, guns are good, some people are bad. Guns in the hands of good people do good things. They're always coming against about disarming people from military-style weapons, and that the founding fathers didn't have in mind that we should own or have military-style weapons. But the fact is, the word militia, M-I-L-I-T-I-A, and the word military, M-I-L-I-T-A-R-Y, have the same root. So I say that they had exactly that in mind, that American militiamen should be armed like the military to defend ourselves against all enemies, foreign and domestic. And as a matter of fact, this did happen in 1946, after World War II. Many veterans returned to the United States. Among them were some that went and lived in Athens, Tennessee. When they arrived, they found a terrible situation that in their absence, a gangster element had taken over the town. A corrupt mayor, a corrupt sheriff were just terrorizing the town. So what these soldiers did is they got their arms and they went into the mayor's office. They arrested the mayor, they arrested the sheriff, they locked them up, they called up the governor, told them what the situation was, and the governor of Tennessee sent the National Guard down to Athens to secure the city. I keep telling people, the founding fathers didn't put the Second Amendment in there so you could go out and hunt for lunch, shoot squirrels or turkeys. It was meant to dispose of tyrants.
I thought it was for rampaging rabbits. Wasn't it for rampaging rabbits? Didn't I read a book about that at one time?
That's what they want to make you think now. But the fact is, it was to protect our freedoms from tyranny. So that is the real situation. There's a lot of shootings going on. There's a lot of terrible crimes going on. And most of these crimes are being committed. The worst ones, the shooting of 5 people in Texas and the murder and dismemberment of an Uber driver in Florida, are by foreign nationals, specifically Mexicans and members of the MS-13 gang that President Trump, fortunately, came to the rescue of Long Island, New York, where Peter used to live. It was being terrorized by MS-13 gangs. They were murdering people left and right in the most ghastly ways. And President Trump found out about it, and he sent in the ATF, the INS, the Immigration Nationalization Service, and cleaned up Long Island. Unfortunately, so many hundreds of thousands of illegal immigrants have been moving into the United States through Texas that they are now creating a crime wave all across the South and the Southwest. Meantime, Lori Lightfoot of Chicago is writing irate letters as she leaves office, none too soon, directed at the governor of Texas. Everyone recognized what Biden was doing. He was attacking Texas and Florida by disposing of immigrants in those 2 states to destabilize the states. But the 2 intelligent governors of Texas, Governor Abbott and Governor DeSantis, they saw the ploy. They saw the tactics that were being used against them, and they said, well, you're not going to flood our states with these illegal immigrants. You want them, you keep them. He sent them to sanctuary cities like Chicago and San Francisco and New York. And now the headache is on the shoulders of Mayor Adams and Lori Lightfoot and the incoming mayor of Chicago, Brandon Johnson. Okay, we are at the top of the hour. We'll be back in 4 minutes. Hang in there. We'll be back. Thank you.
Listen to Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com, and we'll be right back after this message.
Hello, my name is Mr. Rowe. I am the host of Reality Extraction, Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com. I utilize logic, intellect, and magic to methodically autonomize, vivisect, analyze, examine, study, scrutinize, and extract an essence of reality from a fog of illusion and confusion. You can find me on Studio B every Thursday, 1700 hours Pacific Time. That's 8 p.m. Eastern. No topic taboo, no subject too strange. I strive to take a neutral standpoint during the dissection of the topic at hand. That's Reality Extraction with Mr. Rowe on Revolution Radio.
Join me at Revolution Radio, Studio B, at 11 a.m. on Saturday for Free Association, when we take a look at philosophy, spirituality, psychology, social issues, and geopolitics. It's every Saturday at 11 a.m. Eastern on Studio B at freedomslips.com.
I am Bill Johnson. Some consider my efforts to be an underground law school. I am not an attorney, and I do not give legal advice. I teach. That's lawful and legal. Consider yourself served. You are to appear Wednesday nights, 10 p.m. Eastern, Studio A. My forte? Foreclosure and contract law. Grab your legal pad and pen. Learn a broad spectrum of law spanning administrative, criminal, family, tort, and federal law. Fools and losers cling to old cases. I dissect and comment on the latest rulings that control the courts. Don't be a loser. And if you don't appear, you will be held in contempt.
The original machine had a base plate of prefamulated amulite, surmounted by a malleable logarithmic casing, in such a way that the two spurving bearings were in a direct line with a panometric fan. The lineup consisted simply of 6 hydrocoptic Marsal vanes, so fitted to the ambifacient lunar wane shaft that side fumbling was effectively prevented. The main winding was of the normal Lotus-O deltoid type, placed in panendermic semi-boloid slots of the stator, every 7th conductor being connected by a non-reversible Tremi pipe to the differential girdle spring on the up end of the gram meters.
Thank you for listening to Revolution Radio, taking the confusion out of transmutated lunar girdle springs for 4 years and running. Revolution Radio, the #1 listener-supported media radio. I want to thank everybody for listening to Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com, the one place where information never sleeps. Revolution Radio.
All right, let's show them what we got here.
All right, thanks for listening while we took that short break here at Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com. And yeah, we're going to get back to your host.
Greetings and welcome to this special edition of the Flash Gordon Radio Club. We're going to continue our discussion from over the weekend of UFO.
And I want to show you a series of things. So let's look at this.
Dr. Greer, let me introduce you. I want to talk about the dangers of UFOs. They are not something to be played with, toyed with, approached. I've said it many times. They are lethal in more ways than one. They are psychologically debilitating. They can damage you and expose you to radiation, high heat, psychotronic weaponry that aliens have. They can mess up your mind in many ways, psychologically, psychically, emotionally. And one of the main cases, one of the principal cases of damage to human beings happened in Texas in 1974. It's a very famous case. It's called the Cash Landrum UFO incident. And Mrs. Cash and Mrs. Landrum were friends. They were in their car with a child. They were driving along, and all of a sudden they saw this amazing sight. They saw a strange-looking craft that was moving slowly over a Texas highway, escorted by several very heavy-duty Chinook helicopters of the U.S. Army and the U.S. Air Force. And it was obvious that these helicopters were escorting this UFO. When the UFO came over their car, they started to boil. All the occupants claimed that they started to feel like they were burning up from the inside. They suffered very, very serious exposure to radiation. They had to go to the hospitals, and the doctors concluded that they had been exposed to high levels of radiation. What kind, they did not know exactly. Well, I came across a very interesting discourse, a lecture given by Stephen Greer, who's part of the disclosure group. He has his own disclosure group, and he believes that aliens are benevolent and that, of course, the U.S. government is hiding UFO reality, which we all know to be true. So right now, I would like to play a few minutes of Dr. Greer's description of this case. And of course, if the sound doesn't come through or sound degrades, Peter or Alan, you'll tell me. Okay, so let's listen to Dr. Greer describe the Cash Landrum affair. He was ready to talk. And here he goes. He's winding up.
Now, what I would like to begin to share with you is a series of things on this issue that sort of presents how are they going to do it? Now, one of the things that we'll start showing, if you want to, for a moment, if you can provide, this is the authorization for the study that's due in June. And then I want to show you a series of things. So let's look at this for a moment. This is a very interesting case. Cash Landrum, you probably have all heard of it. This was actually a extraterrestrial vehicle that was being test flown by 4 humans out of the Nevada test range. And this we have from an Air Force intelligence guy who is the principal investigator. You'll see his clip later talking about the fact that he debriefed the pilots of this and what happened. As you know, the people underneath this object, when it was out of control, were irradiated and were extremely and very sick, had to be hospitalized. One of the famous cases in 1980. Now what happened is that when this occurred, they couldn't get the extraterrestrial energy power plant to work. So they put on, foolishly, a portable nuclear power plant on this thing. And they were test flying it out of the Nevada test range, Area 51. By the way, nobody calls it that, but people don't know what's out there. And it was being flown to a base in Texas. It went out of control outside Houston, Huffman, Texas, I believe it was. And it came down and irradiated, and actually irradiated the land there. And actually, that whole road had to be repaid clandestinely. Now, the public was left to believe this was, the aliens came down and poisoned everybody. Or they didn't say, they were happy for people to leap to these conclusions. In reality, this, we have now proof and testimony from the principal investigator for the Air Force who debriefed the 4 pilots on this, humans. And that object, my friend, was test flown by humans, but it was extraterrestrial. So this is a hybrid case where you have an extraterrestrial airform and systems, but the power energy system, they couldn't quite get to work. They put this nuclear power plant on it. It had a filter or some problem with malfunction, started spewing this stuff out to these poor victims who have never been compensated. In fact, the case went to court. The judge threw it out because the government said, we don't know what this is. We had nothing to do with it. But the truth is, they weren't lying. The government, people talk about the government. Which government? Who in the government? The nature of an unacknowledged special access project like this is that if the Secretary of Defense doesn't know about it, and the director of the CIA isn't read into it, and they're lying to the president about it, do you think the public information officer or the case officer for an Air Force base near Houston is going to know what the hell this was? No. So they're not lying. This is plausible deniability. Because since they don't know, they can testify under oath, this wasn't ours. We know nothing about this. Now we know for a fact. And we have the recorded video testimony of the Air Force Office of Special Investigations, principal investigator on this, Richard Doty, who is a master of disinformation in his career, but is coming clean on some of this. Next. We're going to go through a series of, maybe not. Okay, I thought it was just going to be a slide one after another. So next year, what we're going to see are a series of schematics and cases of over the years. Very interesting. This is 1956, sort of a domed object with these underneath. This was a man-made anti-gravity vehicle from the 50s that was seen, and we can go to the drawing of it. Very good, excellent illustrations. And you know, a very well-documented case. I'm going to go through a number of these examples. Next. This is one from New Zealand, our friends from down under. This was also a man-made object. The date on this is listed somewhere below there. I believe it was in the 50s. And that object, a very well-documented case, occurred. And someone came out and was a human in sort of an astronaut suit. But this, I believe, was 1959. Here we are. Yeah, Blenheim, New Zealand. It had these flames, so it had a combination of anti-gravity and also other types of energy systems. And people say, "Oh, this is from New Zealand." I said, "Oh yeah, 1959." Next. So we're going to run through a bunch of these quickly. Okay, next. This is a really interesting one. Again, the dates, this was 1966. Love the Mustang. And this is an object that came in and for some reason landed malfunctioned. Another early prototype of a man-made electrogravitic, meaning anti-gravity, high voltage system. And it rose up and took off like a spark off a grinder, is how it was described. But you can see there's some components of it from conventional aerospace aircraft on the front, the bubble. But this was, again, it sort of had a high drilling, whining sound as it took off and was gone. And this is man-made, 1966. Next. And this is very similar to some of the Tic Tac things. It's got an arc on it. I think this was in, what date is this? This is 20, well, no, not 2017. That's I'm sure the date. Anyway, but a very interesting object, reminiscent of some of the Tic Tac and other objects. We have a number of videos of these canister and cylinder objects. This was seen in enough detail. And you can see the rivets. You can see the detail. An extraterrestrial vehicle is seamless, has no parts like that, has no welds. Those, when you see those, my friends, those are not extraterrestrial. Those are man-made. And there are a series of generations of these that have been rolled out since the 50s operationally. They were studied before this. Next. This is a really interesting one. Again, this 1972, so we're talking almost 50 years ago. Looks like an iron with this rectangular object on it that was seen, and multiple witnesses. Again, this is a man-made platform, a silent electrogravitic. Next. And this is a really interesting one. This is from also 72. It has these sort of flaming energy out of the rear of it, and a bubble. Another one in front that's man-made. I forget which city this was over. Yeah, Venezuela. People say, really, these other countries? Oh, yes, all over the world. I mean, these operations are not just out of remote places like Area 51. So they have these facilities all over the world, you know, Alice Springs here and there, and all over, and they can go anywhere very quickly because they're not using jets and rockets. Because even our most, you know, really extraordinary craft may get anywhere in the world in a couple hours. These don't take that long. So those have been experimented with in different shapes, forms, and sizes. Many of them are based on acquired extraterrestrial vehicles that we have shot down and studied and then experimented with the airframe and the propulsion and energy systems, the flaming ellipse. Next. This is an interesting one. This is from 1980s. I'm just taking you in chronological order. Number one, there are a lot of objects that are sort of rectangular or domed rectangles, totally silent, can float over the landscape. Many of the objects we'll get to in a moment, and seeing the Hudson Valley back in the 80s, 90s, were those kinds of objects. These are, again, electromagnetogravitics. These are pop culture anti-gravity. And different versions of them, different airframes, different experimental types, and many of them have been deliberately flown over populated areas to prompt a UFO sighting, but make people think that they are the extraterrestrial ones. So you have...
Okay, that's, I think, a good little introduction to the subject, for all of you to know that, Uncle Sam is a big liar. Let me just put it. Since Roswell, it's been, as I said yesterday, a reign of lies, a pun intended, R-E-I-G-N, a reign, like the reign of a dictatorial king, and a rain of lies, R-A-I-N, like a shower of lies, that has just befuddled the entire nation, confused everyone. I would say that 90% of the people in the United States don't really know what reality is or what reality means. And the UFO issue is at the core. It's at the core of a lot of this. I'd like to take a moment to read for you, if it's still available. Let me just see. Things appear and disappear from my desk at times. Well, that one disappeared. Well, I was going to read you a report by one of the people that he was referring to, Richard Doty. But I know it well enough to tell you from memory that there was an incident at McGuire Air Force Base in New Jersey in the 1970s, where a UFO was seen flying over McGuire Air Force Base. And McGuire Air Force Base is right next to Fort Dix, New Jersey. So there's an Army base and an Air Force base right alongside each other. They're divided by a single road. So this UFO was seen in the area, and the state police were alerted. And the state police responded to the call, as did the Air Force Space Police. They have MPs, and now they are called SPs now in the Air Force, and they're called Space Police. So everyone responded to this incident, and apparently an alien intruder came down to ground, and they got into a chase, and they chased him across the road from the Fort Dix area to the McGuire Air Force Base area, and he crossed into the Air Force Base. The state trooper went in through the gate, and he was allowed in because he had an official thing to conduct, but he wasn't allowed to get all the way to the runway. And apparently the military police confronted the intruder and killed him. And the state policeman was able to see the body of the alien on the runway, but he wasn't able to get close to it. So this is one of those instances where there was an alien invasion of a U.S. Air Force base, a very famous one, McGuire Air Force Base in New Jersey, which is a center for military transports and military operations all along the East Coast, which strangely enough was stood down at 9/11. McGuire Air Force Base is about 90 minutes from New York City. But on 9/11, all the Air Force bases were stood down. And when they called for jets to come in to the rescue, you might say, they had to come in from Rhode Island, which is a very long way from New York City. We'll be having a program on all the shenanigans that surround the mysteries of 9/11. So right now, let me ask let me ask Alan if he has a comment on UFOs, because he's been seeing things in Colorado. He lives in another hotbed of UFO activity and underground bases, and he has filmed, he's videoed certain strange objects in the sky. But I want to ask Alan, have you ever had a close encounter of the second kind?
Yes.
Yeah.
Where
Not the
evidence
third
has been.
First kind is a sighting. Second kind is close proximity. Third kind is contact.
Okay.
So
I've had second, and I'm privileged to have a 1/4 of a second third contact.
Yeah.
Okay. Actually, what happened was we had quite a bit of activity up in North Dakota where I lived. We lived approximately 30 miles from the nearest town, maybe a good 40 miles maybe. And then on top of it, we were also a good mile north of the main road. So our driveway was the longest driveway you'd ever seen. Anyway, that put us in a beautifully dark area. Every night that it was clear, I could actually see what is referred to as ghost walkers in the sky. They were definitely in orbit. They would sit there and actually stop for each other, flash each other. You'd be able to actually see them communicate through light beams. One night, there was another gentleman that was visiting. I had mentioned this a couple of times, and I noticed one that was, I think it was heading due east. And I hit it with the laser. I'll be darned, but about a half mile all the way around us lit up like it was daytime. This thing powered up. You've seen it several times on night vision, where they are able to capture these things that are otherwise invisible, but they're visible in night vision. And you've seen them power up in that way. Well, we got hit with a power up, and basically I think all that is just a flashlight that's aimed toward wherever that laser came from. I also believe that due to the observations I made in North Dakota, that these things do communicate through laser or through light beams that they direct at each other with encoded messages. So I think that this is a great place in order to start, and that's also the reason why we get so much activity or response from them. And do not hit aerial objects directly with a laser. That's just insane. What you do is you lasso them, you circle them in the sky. You never aim it directly at the vehicle. So you really do need to know what you're looking at before you start throwing lasers around. But the traffic in North Dakota was quite different than it is here in Colorado. I rarely would ever use a laser in Colorado just simply because of the much air traffic that there is, and Denver Airport just is that busy, that's all.
Yeah. Well, if you do it, don't be surprised if the FBI comes knocking on your door, or the FAA, because it's a very serious offense. You can blind a pilot. People in New York have done it, and they've been hauled away. In other states, people, it's a beautiful gadget, it's a beautiful toy, but it's also very dangerous, especially if a person is flying a helicopter or an airplane and you blast them. One thing, lasers are supposed to stay the same size, but they do spread out. So when you shine a laser that looks like a pin spot where you are, it might grow to several feet in diameter, a few hundred feet away. So be circumspect, be cautious, use it correctly. Now, you remind me of a story that deals with the Kecksburg UFO. In December of 1965, an object came over the United States. It was seen across the Midwest. It was tracked by NORAD, and it came down in Pennsylvania near a town called Kecksburg. It came down in the woods, and everyone rushed. The locals knew about it. They knew something was up, and then the National Guard and the Army moved in and sealed off the forest and got everybody out of there. Then they sent in some heavy equipment, and the firemen, the fire department of Kecksburg, actually was on the scene because they thought there was potential for a forest fire. The bright light seemed like a flame, so they went in, and some of the firemen got actually to the site, and they were able to see something that they describe as an acorn-shaped object with glyphs, strange pictograms around the base of the craft. The Army came in, kicked everyone out. They took the object, they put it on a flatbed truck, they covered up the object with a tarpaulin and hauled it off, and nobody ever saw it again. But strangely enough, the fire department of Kecksburg commissioned an artist to make a model, a copy of it, and actually, according to them, a life-size copy. And they mounted this acorn-shaped object, UFO, on top of their the fire station, the fire department station. And if you go into Google and type in Kecksburg, Keckburgs, Kecksburg Fire Department UFO, you can probably find a picture of it. But the reason that the story comes to mind is that unbeknownst to the Army, unbeknownst to the police, there was somebody in the woods that night. A young man, about 16 years old, was in the woods, just hiking, as I guess people in Pennsylvania are wont to do. And he was looking up and he saw this thing meandering around the sky, this bright object that looked like it was kind of lost or looking for direction. And he had an ordinary flashlight. And he took the flashlight and he flashed the flashlight at the object. And as soon as he did that, the object made a beeline and descended right toward him and landed in the forest not far from him. And he was the one who was able to get the closest to the object and spend the longest time with it outside the U.S. Army, which took possession of it, and was able to describe the same things. Kind of acorn-shaped object with strange writing around the base of it, glyphs of some sort. And many years later, some people have come to the conclusion or assumption that that object could have been something called Die Glocke. Die Glocke means the bell in German. And apparently, in addition to the Haunebu flying saucer type of craft that the Germans were working on, they were working on basically a time machine. And it was shaped like a bell. And a bell and an acorn, they're not that far. They're far apart, depending on the design. So some people believe that the Glocke escaped from Nazi Germany and went into the Phantom Zone and time traveled and landed in Pennsylvania, and that it was captured. And,
I'd like to thank you for clarifying something. On the History Channel, they always show it wrong. They show that the Nazi bell was in the cave, and then above the cave they have the Stonehenge thing and blah blah. No. Right. That was a time experiment to where they could actually accelerate or decelerate time within a bubble, but they could not travel within that time. It was stationary. It's like, you set a clock on the thing that's wound up too tight, it's going to go faster, not wound up enough. So they were able to actually physically slow and speed time using that, but it was not UFO related. That was the core of the machine. It was underground in order to keep it shielded. A lot of the people that worked on that equipment actually passed away from old age, and it actually, the documentation that has come from that has come from the medical realm rather than the scientific realm. That we didn't get any of the blueprints or anything like that, but we do have the medical on the people that worked on it, and that's what happened. They simply were dying of old age at the age of 20.
Right. Well, the Glocke was a small craft, and it had no aerodynamic. It wasn't like a flying wing or a flying saucer. And the Stonehenge structure that you described fits more closely with the Haunebu, the actual flying saucer type that we were familiar with. The flying discs that were being created by the Nazis based on alien technology. That the U.S. Office of Naval Intelligence discovered that the Nazis had made contact through a certain psychic, a certain group of women in the Vril Society, who grew their hair extremely long. They never cut their hair, and they claimed that their hair was like an antenna that facilitated contact with these otherworldly beings. And they actually were the ones that downloaded the blueprints. Maria Orsic is the most famous seer, or psychic or shaman, and she would go into a trance, and she's the one very accomplished in draftsmanship or draftswomanship, because I've seen some of the drawings that she drew under the direction of these reptilian aliens from Aldebaran. And Peter looks like he's having a manifestation in his screen. He's got a white cloud that's appearing. Peter and I had an incredible experience last Memorial Day. I did a tribute to our soldiers and the British soldiers as well. I take Memorial Day very seriously. It's a very solemn day, and I hold it with great reverence. And I pay respects to our soldiers and the British soldiers in World War I, World War II, who preserved our nations. And in the middle of the second hour, or right at the beginning of the second hour, I was surprised as I started reciting the poetry of a young British soldier, a British officer who died in World War I. But there are three famous poets, Rupert Brooke, Wilfred Owen, and Siegfried Sassoon, who wrote poetry about their experiences in World War I. And I was paying homage to Wilfred Owen and reading his poetry, and all of a sudden I look at Peter's background, which is a background of a beach and the ocean and the horizon, a clear horizon with a blue sky. And Peter has had it for months. It's always the same. Except that night I looked at the screen and there was a UFO floating over the horizon with space between the UFO and the water level. And I said to Peter, "Hey, Peter, did you Photoshop your picture? Did you Photoshop and insert a UFO?" Because we'd been talking about certain UFO sightings that were happening in his neck of the woods over there in Florida. And he said, "No, I didn't." I said, "Because I'm looking at it, and there's a beautiful UFO floating over your horizon." And he didn't Photoshop it. And so the show came to an end. I disconnected the call. I called him back to talk again, and the thing was gone. So I feel that I am in contact. They are in contact with us. They give us signs and signals. Sometimes they give us dreams. They give us forewarnings or impressions. And it's good to listen to your intuition. And so that's, they're all over the place. And I'm happy to report tonight, I was able to recompose the film. I've talked about it for quite a bit since December. On December 17th, my friend and I went to the park, and I took my video camera, and as I was crossing Broadway, I was joking. I said, "Hey, I haven't taken the camera there in a long time. Maybe today's the day we'll catch a UFO." Jesting, just joking off the top of my head. So we got down there, we shot some film, we shot some videos, the dogs running through the park, the people, having their walks. We talked about an oak tree, a beautiful oak tree that we have there. And then I went on, we walked on to the monument where, as you know, I have a lot of experiences there, teaching Tai Chi there for 50 years. It's actually 48. I started 50 years ago, but I started teaching 2 years later. So I opened up the camera to take pictures of the flags. It was a very windy day and the flags were straight out. I said, "Oh, I've got to get a shot of this." So I looked down at my camera and I flipped it open. And it's a flip screen camera. When you flip the screen, it turns it on. So I flipped the screen, I looked at the screen, framed the flags, pressed the record button, it went on, and 2 seconds later I saw this black shape go by, whizzing by, whoop, and I said, man, that must have been a big bird, because it was really fast, it was really big, but I said, there's something weird. If it was that big in my screen, I should have felt it flying by me. So I just kept shooting video, came home. 11 hours later, just before going to bed, I said, I'm going to take a look at that video. I put it on, and it wasn't a bird. It was a UFO, blazing fast, shooting across the sky and forming a cross. As it crossed behind the flagpole, 2 frames create a cross. And I worked my tail off to try to get that movie of it, compose it, do frame by frame, slow it down, put in titles, and I was ready to upload it to YouTube, and my computer crashed. The drive fried. It didn't really fry. I was able to recover the data. It took me 2 months to recover the data, and it's taken me another 2 months to find all of the pieces of this film, which is called Fast Walker over New York City. Now, Fast Walker is a code name that the U.S. Air Force gave to UFOs that used to streak over the North Pole and come down, fleets of them coming down over Canada toward the continental United States and making us believe that the Russians had launched a nuclear attack on us. And suddenly these UFO fleets would just stop over Canada and then vertically just shoot up into outer space. And the North American Command, NORAD, gave them the name Fast Walkers. Alan referred to them as Ghost Walkers over North Dakota. The Air Force calls them Fast Walkers. And this short video, it's about 5 or 6 minutes long now. I finished it tonight, and I'm ready to render it and show it publicly, so I'm very happy about that. In the meantime, I want to go back to the subject of the war in Ukraine. This is a very serious thing. And we are all being fooled, and it's being used to misguide, mislead us. So I would like to spend the rest of the program listening to a man that I really admire. His name is Colonel McGregor, Douglas McGregor. And he's going to talk about the subject that I brought up earlier, which is how funding Ukraine and giving them so much weaponry has defanged our military, not to mention the tranification of the military by General Milley and his ilk, not to mention the forced inoculation with the clot shot that has debilitated so many millions of people, that I think that Joe Biden, the Chinese puppet in the White House, is actually working on the side of the Chinese, and that they're trying to get us into a war that they want to lose, to destroy what is called the military-industrial complex and surrender our country to the United Nations. So Colonel McGregor is interviewed, and this one deals with Russia and China together could defeat us right now. So let's listen to Colonel McGregor, and please cue me if you don't hear the sound in a few seconds. It's about to start.
Colonel Douglas McGregor is a decorated U.S. Army combat veteran, commentator, and author of 4 books, including Breaking the Phalanx, a new design for land power in the 21st century.
Is this working? There you go. There we go. Okay. Well, thank you for inviting me to join you today. First, let me preface my remarks with a couple of things. First, I'm very happy that I was not on the last panel. Oh my God, what a depressing hour that was. There was no good news. I'm going to try and deliver what I think is some good news in a second. The second thing that shocks me beyond belief is that Harry Kazianis admits that he buys toys at Walmart. I would never do such a thing. I can't believe it. You know. It's out of the question. I would never admit to it. I don't go to Walmart. I'm not a Walmart person. Okay. I have a very different view from my 2 colleagues for various reasons. First, I do not see China as this aggressive military power bent on invading and conquering its neighbors. So I see no evidence for that at all. What little I do know about the Chinese military suggests to me that they aren't very good. Historically, they never have been, and that they would make a mess out of anything they tried to do on their borders. I think Donald Trump has always understood that it is in our interest in most cases to disengage our armed forces from most of the world. And that is certainly true today in Asia. I hear constantly about the dangers in the South China Sea, and I hear it almost inevitably from the United States Navy and the Marine Corps, both of whom see a China threat picture as absolutely vital and essential to the survival of those services and their World War II force structures, to be blunt. We have 3 Marines in charge right now. We have the White House Chief of Staff, who's a Marine. We have the Secretary of Defense, who is a Marine. We have the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, who's a Marine. Why is that important? Because they understand that the moment those 32,000 U.S. Army forces are withdrawn from the Korean Peninsula, the 19,000 plus Marines in Okinawa have no mission. Frankly, they don't have any mission now as it is, but they'll have absolutely no excuse once those troops are pulled out. Why? Because after the Cold War, there was a discussion, how do we justify the Marines in the Pacific? And the answer was...
Folks, I would like to pause for a moment just to clarify that this talk on Russia and China by General McGregor is a couple of years old. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff is an Army general named Mark Milley, and he's responsible for the degradation of the U.S. military during the Joe Biden era. We'll continue with Colonel McGregor.
Supplied by General Colin Powell, who said, well, we'll make them the reserve for the Army on the peninsula. They'll be the backup. If there's a war, they're going to go over and reinforce the Army. So they got to stay in Okinawa. Everybody in Japan wants us to leave. We don't need to be there. They know that. If they add 1% to their gross national product, they will be number 2 or 3 in the world in terms of investment in military power. So there's no requirement for us to be there. Finally, this brings me to this other issue, which is China itself. Yes, China is in the middle of a slowdown. If you look carefully at the decisions that were made to confer extraordinary power on President Xi, those were not accidental. The Chinese have a history that doesn't exist in Korea or Japan. It's called dynastic change. Dynastic change in China usually comes about when people can't eat. Now, we find that incomprehensible, but that is a ever persistent nightmare in the minds and the eyes of the leadership of China. One of the great achievements of the Communist Party of China was to finally reach a point where they could feed everyone. They're very concerned about this downturn. They're concerned about lack of employment. They're concerned about masses of people milling around the great cities on the coast that now have nothing to do. And they are also concerned about the fact that much of the prosperity in China has not penetrated inland. They worry about these things, and that's one of the reasons that President Xi is cooperative. He's cooperative with President Trump, and he's cooperative with Seoul and Tokyo. He has now told the Japanese something that the Japanese have always wanted, access to Chinese markets. If you go back to the last several hundred years of wars between Japan and China, they were inevitably fought over access to Chinese markets, and the Chinese would keep them out. Xi has now turned around and said, we welcome you. We will have you as a partner in the One Road, One Belt program. There is no reason for Japanese-Chinese hostility. And the Japanese know it and the Chinese know it. Now, will this come off exactly as everybody hopes? I don't know, but I think the outlook is very positive. And then finally, there's this thing in Korea. I do not share the view that North Korea is this impregnable, invincible fortress armed to the teeth with nuclear weapons. In fact, I'm someone who thinks that the alleged nuclear capability up there is grossly exaggerated. I know enough about rockets and missiles to tell you that all of their rockets are liquid fueled. No one other than the Three Stooges today would launch a liquid fuel rocket. It's too damn dangerous. They're all old Soviet rockets. And this rocket that supposedly could reach us is an old Soviet rocket that was recently extended in terms of its size and capability to give it longer range. But none of these rockets have ever mounted a warhead. And if you put a warhead on these things, the range drops off precipitously. There are real questions about whether or not they have any nuclear warheads they could mate with a missile. We've never seen any evidence for it. So there's much that's imputed to them that I think is wrong. And then finally, I truly believe that we are going to watch something happen. We're going to discover that North Korea does not survive contact with South Korea. It's not going to survive. Now, is it going to end with a bang? I hope not. I rather suspect it may end with a whimper. We already have credible reports coming out of North Korea that there is enormous discontent. And this discontent stems from the fact that large numbers of people in the North actually do know what exists in the South. And these joint industrial zones are viewed as manna from heaven, the opportunity to get in there and improve. So these are my opening remarks because my time's up.
All right. So
let's focus for a moment, if we can, on China. I'll ask.
Well, that was a little good cheer. Well, it just shows you how badly Joe Biden has handled the situation. To go from that situation, as described by General McGregor. As I said, I respect him very much. He's the only one telling people the truth about what's going on in Ukraine. And it is a fact that it's over for Ukraine. As you heard, that attack by Russia last night took out 2 divisions of Ukrainian troops, and they were already undermanned. And 2 divisions is a lot of soldiers. I think there's 20,000 men in a division by our count. So it's a very dire situation. If Alan or Peter have a comment, I will look for another more current report on the situation in Ukraine. So let's see, Russia and China. Whoa, hold on. Going back. All right, so I'm looking here at bloody missile attack is horrifying. 6 hours ago. This is about what I read to you from Hal Turner. So it's Colonel Douglas McGregor. He should have been a general. We'd be in a lot better shape if...
Okay, I have with me today Colonel Douglas McGregor. We're going to be going over the Russia-Ukraine war and other things going on with the U.S. military and the U.S. government. Colonel McGregor, thank you for being on today's show.
Sure.
So over the weekend, black smoke filled the air of Russia's Crimea region after an oil refinery was hit with a kamikaze drone from Ukraine. 2 things. Do you think this attack was brought on in part by Victoria Nuland of the state bragging about U.S. military having intel on Crimea and the fact that those were open targets? Or is this Ukraine hitting Crimea in retaliation for the missile strikes a few days prior to that?
The strike that you're referring to was executed with an unmanned aerial vehicle that is a one-way operation. You call it a kamikaze drone. It destroyed 1 oil tank. The refinery is continuing to operate. How many they fired or launched against this target in Crimea is unclear, and it was in Sevastopol, by the way. And the gasoline, oil, diesel, and so forth in Sevastopol is completely unrelated to the conduct of ground operations in Ukraine, so it has no operational impact whatsoever. And having struck only 1 tank, quite frankly, it's not going to make any difference to maritime operations for the Russians either. So this is almost more symbolic than anything else. As far as the strikes that went in over the last 48 hours, they're very important. And I think it's useful to pause and talk a little bit about it because it indicates a change in targeting strategy on the Russian side. You'll recall that over several months, the Russians focused first and foremost on the energy grid. Then, in addition to the energy grid, they began to attack the air defense network. Even though the Ukrainians never had a fully integrated air defense system like the Russians, they still wanted to eliminate as much, if not all, of the air defense systems they could so that they would be able to use their air power without interruption. Now what they've done, having destroyed virtually all of the air defense capability, is that they're focusing on a very new set of targets that tells you something about what's coming when the ground dries and Russian ground forces can attack. Over the last 48 hours, the Russians went after clusters of ammunition, armored fighting vehicles, and troops. One of the most important target-rich areas includes the rail yard in Kramatorsk. And in that rail yard, the Ukrainians had built up 200 tons of ammunition. The 200 tons of ammunition, which is very important to Ukraine right now since it's virtually running out of ammunition, that 200-ton ammunition storage point was completely destroyed. So the Ukrainians lost all of that ammunition. In addition to that, they destroyed somewhere between 20 and 40 armored fighting vehicles. I don't know how many of these were on on rail cars and how many of these were on the ground. I have no way of knowing. They also hit something in the neighborhood of about 9 Ukrainian brigade headquarters, killing 1,000 Ukrainian soldiers. This is important because the Ukrainians, of course, desperately need competent officers. They've lost a lot of officers, just as they've lost most of their well-trained fighters. So the 9 brigades that were struck resulted in rather serious losses in terms of competent leadership. Now, there may have also been some allied officers there. We don't know. British, American, French. We may never know, or we may only find out months from now. But I would not be surprised if there were some of those mixed in, because we have been more and more involved down to increasingly lower levels with the conduct and planning of operations by the Ukrainians. Then when you swing across to Kherson, across the other side of the Dnieper River, the Ukrainians had moved down 3 S-300 air defense systems. These are missile carriers and radars, as well as a Gepard anti-aircraft gun. This is a very useful gun from the standpoint of low-level drones, low-level helicopters, anything like that. It's the perfect weapon system. They were there to protect the S-300s. All 3 S-300s were destroyed along with their radars and the gun. So there is, frankly, no ability on the Ukrainian side at this point to protect forces as they move forward to close with the Russians. So I think those strikes were a hugely successful operation. And frankly speaking, the loss of the one oil tank up in Sevastopol may look good on television, but it's largely irrelevant to the outcome of operations.
Okay, so it was more the mainstream media needing to keep this narrative that Ukraine is striking back, that they are doing well, that they are equal to the task of taking on the Russian Federation army. But in the end, it was just a bunch of black smoke, literally.
Yeah, it's well, you hit an oil tank, catches fire, you get lots of black smoke, but it didn't have any impact ashore. That's the point. This was not in support of Russian ground forces or air forces. This was really storage for civilian use as well as potentially maritime force use. In other words, Russian naval forces. But you've hit one tank. There are multiple tanks there, and the refinery continues to operate. So frankly speaking, it's meaningless. But yes, the mainstream media always treats anything the Ukrainians do as though it's a stupendous evidence for imminent victory. Whenever the Russians fall back from a village they've taken because they decide it's not worth defending, it's easier to fall back to existing defensive positions. The loss of a village is sort of hailed as another great Ukrainian victory. We know in that part of the world, given the nature of the terrain, 1 or 2 villages up or back really aren't terribly meaningful. It's the same mentality. But I think the change in the targeting strategy really is important. It also tells us a few other things. Russian intelligence is excellent. They know exactly where the Ukrainian brigade headquarters are. Now, we're also providing intelligence to the Ukrainians, and the Ukrainians recently hit a Russian brigade headquarters. So we're doing everything we can to provide them with information, but there's a vast difference between the destruction of 9 Ukrainian brigade headquarters and everybody in them and over 1,000 dead versus 1 Russian brigade headquarters. In other words, the difference in capability is profound. And I think even though we give them excellent intelligence, they just can't exploit it on the scale that they would like to be able to do.
Well, folks, we're coming to the end of the program. I want to thank you for tuning in. I like to think that our program is a true reality check that is to your benefit and to those you know. Straighten them out, tell them what's really going on. Also, please contribute to Revolution Radio. Go to revolution.radio and or freedomslips.org and make a donation. Also, contribute to the Morning Star Report by making a donation via PayPal to Robert D. Morningstar. or write to me, robert.morningstar@gmail.com, if you'd like to make a tax-deductible donation through Global Peace Media. Log on to our newsletter. The Morningstar Report newsletter on Substack is doing very well. We have a growing readership. We have about 1,000 subscribers. I would like you to be one of them, and a supporter. robertmorningstar.substack.com, and you can read about the webinars that I will be offering. This webinar on UFOs and where is Magonia? The question is, where is Magonia? And that is one of the places these ETs claim to have come from when they were landing in the Middle Ages in France and being captured by French people. They said to them, where are you from? Well, we're from Magonia. Well, we found out yesterday where Magonia is, and if you're interested, sign on, register for the next webinar. We're also going to be doing health-related webinars on how to recover from COVID and how to get over the ill effects of the CB19 clot shot. So, folks, that's the show for tonight. I want to thank our engineers, Revolution Radio, Alan Edgerton, Pete Puska.
Thank you for listening to Revolution Radio.
Okay, we are off the air. Thanks, guys.
Hey, you bet, man.
You're welcome.
Thanks for being on. Alan.
Yeah.
I think it would be very good. I'm not going to be on the show tomorrow morning, but I'm going to give you this link. I think you heard a good bit of really cogent commentary on the Ukraine situation. So I'm going to put the link here, and perhaps you can play that as the Morningstar report for Tuesday.
How long is it?
Well, it's a half an hour long.
Oh, no problem. No problem. As long as it ain't, an hour and 10 minutes. that would be a little difficult.
This one's only half an hour.
Yeah, no, dude, I'll give you an entire hour
30
if
minutes.
you want it.
It's 30 minutes. And he's a brilliant man, and he's an honest man, and he's telling everyone the truth about the situation there. And
Hey,
I think we owe it to the people.
The other day you said something and it struck me, and then all of a sudden it made sense, but it didn't make sense because I can't trust a 60-year-old memory. Did you say that you were the editor for UFO magazine?
UFO Digest.
Digest.
And UFO Spotlight. I have two.
Okay. And this dates back for how long?
2004 is when I started writing at UFO Digest, and I've been the editor-publisher since 2014.
Okay. The reason why I was asking that, I have to go back and see if I can find some reference for it. But you may have in your old archives a couple of stories that I've been trying to find. And you may know where to find them.
It is an archive now, and it's kind of shut. And the webmaster, who was supposed to...
I wasn't talking about the physical one or the one online. I'm talking about the encyclopedia you got in the back of your brain.
Oh, that one. Yeah.
That'll work.
I remember. Yeah, okay.
I just need to get some references on that, because if I can get that... Dude, I talked to Russell Anderson just before I joined here, and there's a huge thing. Something happened that's just off the hook. I have a theory I call unified difference rather than unified theory. Okay, and what it is based on a null versus a charge. Either it has a charge or it does not. Okay,
Yeah.
we're surrounded by ambient energy all the time. We're mystified by how to tap into it, whatever, but that doesn't matter. We're surrounded by it because we live in a pool of it. So it got me thinking, and then do yourself a favor, never listen to Stephen Hawkins after 6 o'clock in the evening. Okay.
I don't listen to him before 6 o'clock in the evening. You know,
No, I bumped into one of his books.
I actually had an eyeball to eyeball and a salute to Stephen Hawking. I did get something psychic from him.
Yeah.
Robert, I'm going to sign off. I have an early day tomorrow.
Oh, okay, Peter. Thanks a lot, Peter. Thanks for all the help.
Have a good night, fellas.
Okay. Good night.
Bye-bye.
But after I had done this, and that's what I was calling you about, is the fact that there's this knoll, and then there's this other thing. Well, I got a hold of Russell Anderson. I started to explain it, and he says, dude, that's just 8 months old. What you're talking about is only 8 months old and is only just catching on. I've had this build of this unified difference for the last 10 years.
Yeah.
In my mind. I mean, I have visualizations of how it interacts rather than any math or anything like that. I have ratio. I have visualization of the mechanics of it, you know, and
you should draw it.
No, it would have to be expressed. Yeah, have you ever heard of a guy on YouTube called Alien Scientist?
I heard it, but I've never watched it.
Okay,
I mean,
if you go over and watch anything, when I first met him, we loosely, and I claimed him, just like I kind of claim you at this point, okay? You know, with the network that we had then, which was the Unity Group. And what we were doing is researching 9/11. Anything that we had, we'd either store it or pass it on, make sure that the information got out there. I mean, we had everything. We had the firefighters in the plaza. We actually had footage of the lobby actually exploding. Not upstairs. The building wasn't falling. It was the lobby exploding. So, I mean, we had footage of it. Yeah. And we had all this footage, okay, and we were sharing it, this, that, and the other thing. He was kind of on the edge of it, but he came out, he did the research and just whooped us all. Go look up Alien Scientist Following the Money. You would want to there's two different versions of the documentary.
Because I'm working with a friend who's with that Architects and Lawyers for the 9/11 Commission.
Okay, dude, he has a complete map. He has a complete map of everything, right on down to Halliburton. Okay, he tracked the. He tracked
Bush's son Marvin was in charge of security.
Yeah.
Securacom.
Oh no, he has all of it in there, and it's in a. He has two different documentaries. One I think is 40 minutes. The other one's like an hour and 10 minutes. Watch the hour and 10-minute version. Okay, and you're going to be getting details that you never thought was available. I'm not joking. We were just simply sharing the shock and awe. He went out and actually compiled it.
Wow. Well, all of us have been compiling our own things. Right?
No, he's had my attention ever since. I'll tell you that.
It's great. It's great. All right, so I'll probably see you Wednesday.
Oh, yeah, you bet.
Just play General McGregor for me tomorrow.
Okay, you weren't ignored this morning either. I had you on. I think it was the 16-minute short you did over the weekend.
Yeah. I don't mind doing those. So maybe we can do one tomorrow afternoon or for another day. Because I'm glad that I didn't have.
How many websites do you go to and stuff like that? And the reason why I'm asking is there a common advertiser that you see with a lot of these radio shows? What we need to do is get on the phone with you, me, and everybody, and see if we can get an advertiser directly for your show.
Yeah,
that's someplace we can start right away. Well, I know you already have a couple, but I'm just saying I'd like to work with you on it.
Yeah. No, I don't have advertisers. I have supporters who help me once in a while with some cash flow, but I would basic support. Yeah. So let's talk about it. We'll see what we can do. I would think in Chicago there must be somebody that wants radio advertising, and you have to get some numbers. about the outreach. Like the Nielsen rating that we were talking about.
That's
See if you
no.
can track it down.
I've got those numbers for the radio station. We have two transmitters. The average, even though they're just slightly off frequency from each other, the average between them is supposed to be 40 and 40. So we've got 80 in Chicago. The same ratio for Milwaukee gives us another 80. Then we also have, I think it's Virginia, that has a good, a solid 100,000. And then we also have the internet side.
Right. Okay. Well, let's work on it because, this is springtime. This is when we should get going and really build for the summer. So I'll talk to you later. I'm going to take a break and I'm going to go and render my movie. Wait till you see it. I wish I could show it to you tonight. I'm really proud of it. It was just one of those things, Well, I think the UFOs know, that I was there with the camera. They come around. I'm telling you, I'm like a magnet.
Well, here's something else that I think that you haven't considering the technology. If they're using light in order to communicate, that means that they're also sending out their own signals. They probably do have, that little button that you could push in some of the new cars in order to get roadside assistance. OnStar?
Yeah.
I bet you all of them have an OnStar. But more importantly, if they put out a digitalized signal, a light signal, and something else picks up and comes into harmony with that signal, that means that they're being observed.
Yeah.
So what they do is they put out a digital signal and they look for their echo. They look for the echo of that digital signal, and that tells you, there's electronics looking at you.
Well, I always say I have my guardian angels, and that day was just so strange. Jill and I had been going to the park, every couple of days.
I didn't say there ain't a, psychic aspect to it too, but I'm saying as far as the technology is concerned, you've heard a lot of, cell phones and stuff like that being targeted during a sighting, right? Well, that's how they know that it's there.
I don't have a cell phone, but,
Well, I mean, during a sighting, you hear that electronics stop and stuff like that. There's two reasons. One is the same one that the Chinese used over the American fleet in the Pacific about 10 years ago now. They flew over and everything shut down. They couldn't even get out of the war room of the battleship.
The Russians did that in 2014 to a destroyer in the Black Sea. I was just writing about that to some friends in the Defense Department.
Okay,
those two helicopters crashed in Alaska.
Well, and in 1954, what appeared to be a corn husk hat that was flying sit there and shut a guy's Ford down, 6-cylinder truck, in the middle of nowhere as it flew past, and he was able to grab a couple of pictures of it.
Yeah.
And every other report in that era shows the fact that electronics shut down. But how are they able to selectively shut something down, make it malfunction?
A beam weapon, I guess.
Well, no, it's because they can grab onto it by transmitting a signature. If anything else reflects that signature, that means that is observing them. It is actually in their field of view. It's being observed because that signal is being reflected off of that, just like a mirror. And then when they sit there and be able to do that, then they can target that one device, or they'll probably catch every device in a 20 or 30-foot area. But the thing of it is, they can do that rather than shutting down the entire neighborhood.
Yeah.
Okay, so this technology, I'm familiar with the application. You see, that's the problem. I've had to go from application to how this is being used. Huh?
I know your father was in the Air Force. Were you in the Air Force?
I was in the Army.
Army. Okay.
I participated in some very strange stuff in Hohensfeld. And my operation and my stay at Hohensfeld was suddenly cut short, strangely enough, by my mother's interference. She.
Well, what branch of the Army were you in?
I was a 63 Tango. I was armored cavalry.
Which
I was
division?
a mechanic, 211 Cav. In Bad Kissing in Germany. Now, the same year I was in Bad Kissing in Germany, which was 87. Okay. We had a sighting there. And it was a huge one. Okay. The entire town saw it. The dang thing was about half the size of a city block. In a 4-story building on fire, orange fire. Perfect circle. And it was traveling in between wind shear. I don't care what the hell you're flying. I don't care if you're flying an F-16 or, you know, maybe the 22. Okay? You would not put that airplane there.
Yeah.
Okay? Because, I mean, the buffeting would just tear you apart.
I read that Colin Powell was involved in a shoot down of a UFO coming down one of those German valleys. You know that valley, the one valley that they always said, you know, if the Russians ever invade, this is where they've got to come because it's the only thing wide enough for Russian armor to come down. So it was always monitored. And that's
what our job was. We were 211 Cav. We were stationed at Bad Kissing in Germany, which was only about 20 clicks from the border. Yeah.
Well, they were monitoring and they saw this UFO was coming down the valley on a regular schedule, like a couple of nights in a row. So,
scheduled, definitely.
Yeah, so they were there and they set up some 50 calibers on both sides of the valley and they brought it down. So it could have been East German technology, could have been Russian or something, but
I'll be honest with you. There's like 6 different factions. There's actually 6 different factions, okay, that are actually dominant, and there's plenty of privately owned vehicles past that, and I do mean plenty. I mean, we're talking about something that equals the traffic of Oshkosh for EAA fly-in. Okay, that's how many aircraft we're talking about that are just POV. That's privately owned vehicles of people that was able to sit there and throw away the dogma of science and actually run some real math and use practical solutions. You know, I mean, take a look at the hydrogen fuel cell. It's exactly built not like a 12-volt battery, but that's all a 12-volt battery is, a hydrogen fuel cell. You throw a charge in it produces hydrogen. So they spent all this technology in order to sit there and make it so it won't spew hydrogen in an effective way to make it sit there and make hydrogen oxygen in order to run the entire car. Forget that. You see how they limit these different things?
We should get together with my friend Keith. He's a genius. He did a program 2 weeks ago on all of this. He really is, he's got the clearest insights into all of it. You know, the water car.
Oh, no, Edward Meyer, yeah, I know all about that. The thing of it is, listen, my story goes like this. I was working in a body shop in Joliet. It's a very well-known body shop, the entire county. I was actually like the 7th placed for fabrication and custom for about a year and a half. I actually made 7th place in the state for the ultimate customizer in the state. The only thing I didn't do was interiors. I did framing. I did everything, but not interiors. Anyway, what wound up happening is I was sitting there trying to explain to somebody in the shop, you know, that we could probably build one of those things. And I seen it on the internet, and I had remembered about the car, and it's like I was sitting there talking about it, and they made fun of me for about 3 weeks.
Yeah.
That was it. I built it.
I had the blueprints for converting a.
I didn't have any blueprints at all. I just went from.
No, I had it. This guy sent me the prints and where to put.
Okay, if you have that, I have the missing element for it.
The electrolysis.
Hello.
Hello. For electrolysis.
Hello.
And separating the oxygen. And
hey,
the
listen.
hydrogen,
You don't have to do that. Listen to me. Listen to me.
Chamber.
Stop. If you actually have the build prints, okay, it would be rare because it omits more than one thing, but if you do have the original, it only emits one thing. And I know what that one piece of equipment is. It's a rotating DC generator. Okay? That's the one thing you're not going to find in those prints. Because what happens is if you don't have the polarity constantly switching, you see the only thing that actually produces the hydrogen is the inrush. The same way on a capacitor. You're familiar with a capacitor, right?
Yeah.
Okay, you can sit there and charge it and you discharge it, right? But when it is in a charged state, what happens to a capacitor? Nothing. It just sits there.
Yeah,
so
like
as soon as it stabilizes, as soon as that water is fully charged, it no longer draws current. It goes all into voltage instead because it's a huge resistor, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So the problem is you have to charge it and discharge it. That's the reason why you had 8 cylinders, because each one of those cylinders were slightly out of phase with the other cylinders, meaning that the cylinders were always either in one of 2 states, in a inrush or a discharge. The entire thing, because and it fires just like a regular engine. You know, just like a timing engine. You sit there, you fire the 2 opposed from each other, and then rotate that entire thing, just like on a marquee. Remember the old mechanical advancement for a marquee? It was just simply a slow-moving motor on a bunch of contacts, and it just roll over the contacts. That's how the damn thing worked. But the thing of it is, instead of having one sweeper, it would have 2, 180 degrees. Okay, so it would, 1 and 4, or no, it'd be 1 and 5 would fire in a circle. Do you see what I'm saying? Or it would be in a clock. It would be, but you see that only had 8. No, it's 1, 2, 3, 4. No, wait a minute. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. It had 7 cells. I think it did. It was 6 on the outside and 1 in the middle. Okay, so the middle one would sit there and alternate back and forth. So by the time you sit there and switch and you keep the inrush, always there's an inrush going on. Always there's a discharge going on, and then the center sits there and discharges at a regular rate. Okay, always generating hydrogen. Now you have enough usable hydrogen. The biggest problem that you have is you don't have a shutoff valve or a way of controlling the amount of hydrogen you're going to do. Either you're going to make hydrogen or you're not. Turning down the voltage just means that you're just destroying your ability. You got to have the gas in order to be able to step on the gas. Right? Okay. So you have to have a bladder tank, and you install a bladder tank just like on a house. Okay. And you install a bladder tank. But in between the bladder tank and the generator, you know what you want to do? You want to install 2 event arresters. Okay. I built all this in the shop, and I hooked it up to a lawnmower. Now, here's something that I didn't think of. You see, I wanted to prove that I could start it with the hydrogen gas and prove it, right? All right. Well, the problem was I had to show the fact that the gas cap or gas tank was empty, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, here I did. I shoved the hose into the venturi of the mower, and what happened was it the hydrogen seeped down into the gas tank. During my demonstration, I got to start several times. I just didn't quite have enough gas being made in order to keep it running. You see what I'm saying? But it'd run for about 30 seconds and stop. Meanwhile, this hydrogen gas was creeping down into the gas tank. I did not put the cap back on it. So the dang thing backfired, set off the gas tank, and blew the entire side of the lawnmower off.
Oh, my God.
How's that for a mic drop?
Very dangerous work.
Well, the thing of it is, the one that Deep Throat in the 70s, I can't remember his name again. He came out with this hydrogen-driven Corvette, which is a complete fallacy. He claims that it's bulletproof fucking tanks, all this other shit. No, that is the most dangerous motherfucking piece of shit I've ever seen. and he stores his hydrogen. He doesn't show you how to make hydrogen. He just stores the hydrogen. No. You needed to sit there and actually. No, he is a complete farce.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, anyway, listen, I gotta go.
All right.
I gotta get to Wicked Leak, and I'll talk to you in a day or so.
All right,
okay?
man. I'll check you then.
All right. Good
All
night.
right, bye-bye. Hey, that wasn't too bad. We had a good show tonight. I didn't talk too much. I talked after the show. Me and Robert can get into some conversation, so. Yeah, yep. Only busy in my mind, huh? What an idiot you are, man. You think I have time for your foolishness? Idiocy? Your idiocy. Whatever. Anyway, thank you for joining. Talk to y'all later. May God be with you, folks. Have a great day.